There's probably a few of us out there right now that wish that we were a little thinner and could drop a few pounds, and the waiver wire's actually been doing a really good job of that because it's been cutting the fat over the last couple of weeks. But unfortunately, we can't follow suit with the waiver wire, because if we were to do that, we would basically be non-existent, because that's how thin it is this week. Yo, what's going on, Headliner Nation? I tell you what, if you're looking to hit the waiver wire this week, there's not a whole lot out there. There's not going to be a lot of game-changing players, and you might only be looking for depth this week, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a couple of important guys out there that you shouldn't be trying to add to your roster right now. So as always, for the waiver wire, we're going to take a look at the top running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that we should be looking to add, and then I've got some quarterback and defensive special teams that we could potentially stream in week 11, and we'll discuss a few players at the end of it that you probably could just drop off your roster entirely. Hit the like button and turn on those bell notifications, and let's hop right into it, and we're going to kick it off with our running backs. Even though D'Onta Foreman's been playing really well, Khalil Herbert should be back this week against Detroit. He was almost able to make it back for Thursday Night Football, wasn't quite ready to do that, and even though this week's matchup against Detroit is going to be tough on the ground, expect to see Khalil Herbert get worked back into the rotation a little bit. And prior to his injury, Khalil Herbert had a firm lock on the RB1 job in Chicago, and he really didn't do anything to lose it. So I don't expect him to just come back and take the job back right away, but I do expect a much larger 50-50 split between him and D'Onta Foreman moving forward. I've been mentioning Devin Singletary even before the Dameon Pierce injury, and if you grabbed him up early, I've been telling you just to hold him. Keep him on your bench and just use him as some depth in case you run into buys or injuries and you have to start him, because he wasn't really fantasy viable. And then in one of the least anticipated matchups where Devin Singletary would be used, the dude absolutely goes off for 150 yards on the ground. Now, he's going to get an Arizona matchup this week that also is going to benefit him, and Dameon Pierce didn't seem close to returning last week because he didn't even practice. So even if Pierce makes it back to practice, and even if he becomes eligible for this game, I would say we're probably leaning towards Devin Singletary really kind of being the lead back as of right now. And if he can have another good week going up against Arizona, he absolutely could have a firm lock on the RB1 status in Houston. But keep in mind, this was one performance. Nobody for Houston at the running back position has done anything leading up to this game. So let's not get super excited about one performance last week. I am willing to say he'll definitely be inside my top 30 next week, but I'm not going to overdo it after that. Keaton Mitchell got off to another hot start this past week against the Cleveland Browns, and given the defense he was going up against, that 39-yard touchdown run at the beginning of the game absolutely looked like that we could have been in for a big day. But if you take a look at his final stats for the day, he ran the ball 3 times for 34 yards. That's right, he had a 39-yard touchdown run, and he only ended the day with 34 net yards. That's because his last 2 carries didn't end up going that well either. Keaton Mitchell's going to be a guy that people are flaunting over, and they love his big play potential, and they're going to want to continue to add him and start him and play him, and I get that, and he's got big play potential. He's a guy that I mentioned weeks ago, even before he came off the IR, to keep an eye on as we got further into the season, because maybe down the stretch, he became a guy that could help us win some fantasy championships. But as of right now, it's still Gus Edwards as the number 1. Keaton Mitchell has really, at this point, in my opinion, kind of taken over as the RB2 from Justice Hill. So he's working his way up there. But it's going to take a lot to unseat Gus Edwards, especially in the red zone. So unless Keaton Mitchell is scoring big-time touchdowns every single week, he's not really going to be fantasy viable. So just keep that in mind. We're definitely picking him up, especially you Gus Edwards owners, stashing him on our bench. And if something happens to Gus, then we definitely can start Keaton with a little bit more confidence. But until that happens, he's a lot of boom or bust. and he could end up ruining weeks for you. When Cam Akers went down with his injury last week, I mentioned Ty Chandler to everybody, and I said, hey, if you own Alexander Mattison, you might want to back him up with Ty Chandler. If you play in deeper leagues, you may want to grab him as well. Well, Alexander Mattison unfortunately goes down with a concussion this past week. Ty Chandler takes over, scores his first career touchdown, and we don't know if Alexander Mattison will make it back for his matchup this week against Denver. So if you're going to be dealing with any buys this week, or if you're dealing with depth issues, or if you own Alexander Mattison, Ty Chandler is definitely going to be a priority add for us given the matchup that he's going to have this week. Now, Rico Dowdle might not be a guy that we're just tossing into our fantasy lineups right now, but it is going to be interesting to see how the next couple of weeks go for him and Tony Pollard, because Tony Pollard had a smash matchup this week, and he still didn't do anything with it. In fact, he was outplayed by Rico Dowdle, even if Dowdle's main touches were at the end of the game in garbage time, because he only needed 12 carries for 79 yards and a touchdown. And we're probably still going to see Tony Pollard get the lion's share of the touches. I'm talking 3/4 of the touches. But if he doesn't get more efficient over the coming weeks, then Dowdle is going to be a guy that it would not shock me if he starts to see a few more touches himself, especially if he's more efficient. Keep an eye on that. And Tony Pollard owners, I would definitely back him up with Dowdle right now if I were you. And this is just another reminder to everybody out there to be taking a look at your top running back handcuffs right now, because we're at that point of the season heading into the playoffs where I would much rather have my running back handcuffs than somebody else's handcuffs. If you deal with an injury to any of your top running backs, then you know that you have their replacement and you're going to be solid putting them in your lineup. But if you're holding other people's handcuffs and you have an injury, you're not necessarily going to have anybody that you could start with a potential RB1 touch. So make sure that you back up those guys. Christian McCaffrey, have Elijah Mitchell. Travis Etienne, have Tank Bigsby. Kenneth Walker, have Zach Charbonnet. Derrick Henry, have Tajay Spears. Everybody like that. Make sure that you are handcuffing your running backs, because when we get into the fantasy playoffs, you're going to want to have them. All right, moving over to the wide receiver position. For the Los Angeles Chargers, Quentin Johnston and Jalen Guyton are both going to be interesting speculative adds this week, going up against a tough Green Bay team where Jair Alexander will probably be on Keenan Allen. Now, for Jalen Guyton, he's kind of the deep threat on this team right now. He did barely outproduce Quentin Johnston this past week, even though they both scored a touchdown. But right now, Jalen Guyton is kind of third in the pecking order for targets behind Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler. For Quentin Johnston, he could end up getting there, but right now he's fourth in the pecking order. If I had to add somebody in this matchup, I would probably go with Jalen Guyton over Quentin Johnston, but he definitely has some deep play potential this week, and it's two guys that we're going to want to monitor moving forward until Josh Palmer returns. I do love the fact that Noah Brown went off this past week, because I've had him listed in the waiver wire video the last 2 weeks, and there was even several people that asked this week if they should start Noah Brown, and I told them yes, go ahead and do it. So if you were one of those people that started Noah Brown, let me know in the comments down below, because that's awesome that he has such a big day in your lineup. And the main reason why I was listing Noah Brown as a potential start, because he had 3 straight games with at least 1 reception that went bigger than 30 yards. And he was kind of a deep play guy that we were keeping an eye on, especially with Houston dealing with some injuries to Nico Collins. Robert Woods has been banged up for a while. Definitely some big play potential there, and he ended up showcasing it once again. Now, Nico Collins, we'll keep an eye on it. If he comes back, it definitely is going to hurt Noah Brown, but Houston's been throwing it so much that in PPR leagues, even when Nico Collins comes back, Noah Brown could still have some potential upside for you. Jaden Reed is everything that Christian Watson truthers want Christian Watson to be. And honestly, he's kind of taking over that Christian Watson role. He definitely has more big play potential at this point. And even though Watson saw more targets this past week, he continues to be highly vulnerable. He either isn't getting much separation, he isn't getting open, or he's dropping passes that are right to him. Watson's showing a lot of those issues that we saw coming out of the draft. And really at this point, Jaden Reed is trying to take over that spot, and he's doing a heck of a job of it. If I had to look for one guy to be the most consistent wide receiver for Green Bay down the stretch, I would pick Jayden Reed. Tennessee is definitely throwing the ball a lot more than in previous years, and with an injury to Treylon Burks because he's out with a concussion right now, Kyle Phillips has stepped up over the last 2 weeks, and he has 60 receiving yards in both of those games. Now, if Treylon Burks comes back, Kyle Phillips is basically irrelevant, but for those of you in PPR leagues, I would keep an eye on it, because once again, they'll probably be throwing the ball quite a bit this week, and if they do, Kyle Phillips could once again go over 60 yards. I think from a fantasy perspective, we would love to find a little bit more consistency from the Cleveland offense. They're playing great right now from a real life perspective. Huge upset over Baltimore. But maybe Elijah Moore could be one of those guys moving forward that does see some more consistent targets. He was number 2 in targets right behind Amari Cooper and David Njoku, who tied for the team league this past week. And with some potential matchups coming up, I definitely could see Elijah Moore getting a few more targets than what we have consistently seen. This is nothing more than a what-if ad right now, and there's a lot of other wide receivers on this list that I would much rather have first. I still have a feeling that Michael Wilson is going to have some big games down the stretch for anybody that picks him up. I've mentioned him a few times over the last couple of weeks with Kyler Murray coming back, because his average depth of target this year has been over 15 yards, one of the best in the league. And Kyler Murray, his first game back, looked pretty good. He did a good job of spreading the targets around to everybody. But going forward, I definitely think Murray, as he gets a little bit more comfortable and starts taking more shots down the field, Michael Wilson will benefit from that greatly, and so may our fantasy lineups. Brandon Powell will be nothing more than a deep stash right now. KJ Osborne missed this past week, but he could potentially miss again. Justin Jefferson wasn't quite able to make it back, but he could make it back next week. For those of you, if we get to later in the week and Osborne and Justin Jefferson were to miss again, and you're in a deeper league where you're looking for somebody to get you targets, then Brandon Powell might be an ad for you at that point. Now, as of this recording, Khalil Shakir had not played as of yet because he's on Monday Night Football. But if he has another good game on Monday Night Football, definitely consider him in PPR leagues, especially if you have to start 3 wide receivers. Not seeing a ton of upside right now, but definitely seeing an okay amount of targets that if he catches them all, he could be right around 8 fantasy points for those of you in deep PPR leagues that are just looking for somebody to fill in. There are a couple of guys that I want you to keep on your radar heading into the bye, because with how shallow waivers are this week, it's probably best for you to just take a shot on them right now. And Demario Douglas continues to be one of the best ads. I mean, we don't have any idea who the quarterback is going to be coming out of the bye, but Demario Douglas has seen 29 targets over his last 4 games and has been a pretty decently safe option for us for guys just looking for fantasy points. And then for Isaiah McKenzie, with Josh Downs dealing with an injury over the last couple of weeks, he's getting way more work out of the slot right now. And coming out of the bye, if Downs still isn't 100% healthy, McKenzie could have a decent workload once again. At the tight end position, I'm just going to remind everyone that Pat Freiermuth is eligible to come off the IR now and could start making his way back this week. Now, with the volume that's going out to guys like Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Jalen Warren, there may not be a ton of volume for Pat Freiermuth, but we know for certain that Kenny Pickett loves to target him, especially in the red zone. So maybe we aren't starting him right away, but he could definitely be a nice tight end savior for those of you that are dealing with issues finding anybody with consistency. But if you haven't added Trey McBride yet, you absolutely have to do so right now. And it's crazy that this guy is still under 60% owned across multiple platforms, because he's getting way too much work right now. But maybe y'all have taken notice after this big game this past week. But keep in mind, for Trey McBride, he gets Houston this week, the team that allows the most fantasy points to the tight end position over the last 4 weeks. Luke Musgrave continues to get overlooked in terms of targets. Maybe we could give him those 7 targets instead of Christian Watson. I feel like they would work out a lot better. But he's still showcasing big playability, and they have the Los Angeles Chargers this week, who give up the 6th most fantasy points to the tight end position. All right, streaming options at the quarterback position. And for me, Josh Dobbs and Jordan Love are going to be the 2 main guys that I'm taking a look at. There could be some other guys available in your leagues, but these 2 are still widely owned in a lot of leagues right now, both of them well under 50%. Josh Dobbs offers us some pretty decent upside, especially when it comes to his ability in the run game, where he has more 20-yard runs than any other quarterback in football this season. and he gets a Denver Broncos defense that, while it has looked a little bit better as of recent, is still one of the worst statistically in the league. Josh Dobbs definitely could have a decent upside for you at quarterback this week. And Jordan Love is going to get a Los Angeles Chargers defense that has allowed the 4th most fantasy points and the 2nd most passing yards to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. And they also just gave up a ton of big plays to a Detroit Lions offense at home. Khalif Raymond, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs all saw huge chunk plays in the passing game. So while Jordan Love's floor could be really bad any given week, in this matchup, he could get back to some of that ceiling that we saw earlier in the year. For defenses that you may be looking to stream this week, Minnesota is going to be going up against Denver. And Minnesota's defense, surprisingly enough, has scored the 7th most fantasy points for defensive special teams this season. Definitely going up against Denver, there's going to be an opportunity to create some sacks and some turnovers. And even if they give up a little bit more yards than you would like, they could still make up for that with those categories. In Jacksonville right now, their defensive special teams are ranked 12th in fantasy football, and they get the young quarterback, Will Levis, in Tennessee this week that has really had a tough time staying consistent, whether it be on the ground or through the air. So Jacksonville, definitely a great opportunity to create some chaos for Levis this week and really move things in their favor. All right, a few guys that we're just going to look to move on from and drop from our fantasy rosters. And Hayden Hurst is still like 45% owned right now. So if you've been hanging on to him in the hopes that Bryce Young would start finding him, I just don't think that's going to happen. He had a smash matchup this past week, and it didn't work. For Gerald Everett, he's another guy. With Josh Palmer down, I thought Gerald Everett was going to get a few more looks. And he did. He did get a few more looks the first couple of games with no Palmer, no Mike Williams. But this past week, in a game that had almost 1,000 combined total yards between both teams, Gerald Everett saw 2 targets. For Christian Watson, I just can't trust him anymore. He hasn't shown any of the upside that people would have wanted, and he's definitely showing no floor and no consistency. 7 targets this past week, and he only caught 2 of them. He's having issues separating and getting open. I know he's been banged up, but his hands are still super inconsistent as well. Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, other guys are getting less looks than he is right now and doing even more with it. Christian Watson is not fantasy viable. Justice Hill basically has lost his job as the number 2 RB to Keaton Mitchell at this point. It's kind of back and forth. We didn't see a ton of work from Keaton Mitchell, but given his explosiveness, wouldn't doubt it if we start to see a little bit more volume from him. Justice Hill is still finding his way onto the field, but not really getting the touches that would warrant us keeping him for fantasy. A lot of people are still running with Michael Thomas on their rosters, and he's the wide receiver 45 right now. He's getting out-targeted by Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. Taysom Hill is getting a ton of looks right now. Alvin Kamara is getting more targets. I mean, when you take a look at this offense, Michael Thomas just isn't the priority like he has been in the past. For me, Michael Thomas, if you're looking to find somebody more consistent, the waiver guys that I added earlier in this video, some of them have way more potential than what Michael Thomas does. And for Juju Smith-Schuster, I think a lot of us tried to maybe snatch him up a couple of weeks ago when Kendrick Bourne went down. He scored a touchdown, had 7 targets last week, but right back to really fantasy irrelevancy. Right now, Demario Douglas and maybe Ramondre Stevenson are the only guys that I'm trusting in this offense. And outside of that, there's not a whole lot to buy into. So Juju can find his way right back to the waivers. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it. It's super thin this week. There's not a whole lot of guys to grab. So if you're looking for impact players right away, they may not be here, but take a shot on the few guys that we did talk about. There are a couple of running backs that we definitely could add up that could help us right away. Wide receivers, there's a couple of guys as well, and Trey McBride shouldn't even be available in any leagues at this point. But do me a favor, Headliner Nation, as you head out the door, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new here. Hey, maybe become a part of the exclusive Headliner Nation. Hit the join button down below. Get access to our exclusive Discord, members-only streams, and members-only videos that we post throughout the week. And in the comments down below, if there's anybody that you're looking to drop that was not added in the drop portion of this video, let me know down in the comments, and I'll try to get to as many as I can this week. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.